Welcome to the Cookies and Coffee Podcast. My name is Cale Owen.
And my name is Maggie Owen. I am the VP of Operations and Cale is the CEO. And together we run 2 8-figure businesses and we are in the middle of building a startup.
And this podcast is to document our journey as high-level executives, as parents, and as husband and wife, so that we can share what's working for us, what we found that doesn't work, lessons, tips, and tricks, so that if you are married and working together or want to do that, you can learn from what has worked for us and for many other people so that you can have an incredible marriage, an incredible business, and an incredible life. Interesting question came up. And it was about what are some of the things that no one warns you about when you start working with your spouse?
Yeah.
So I want to hit on that today. Because obviously we've been working together for, 7 years now?
Yeah. Yeah.
6, 7 years, something like that. In different capacities at different levels. But both of us at some point have been in leadership roles within the companies that we're at.
Or owned a business together.
Yep. Or owned a business together. Which is really interesting because at one point, you and I were technically in separate businesses, and you were a director and I was a manager.
Yes.
Yeah, you leapfrogged me. You came in at director level. And
you don't let me forget that.
I was just a lowly sales manager. Just lowly
went right
sales
for the
manager.
director.
Yep.
Director status.
I was like, nope. Okay, so the things that people don't warn you about.
Yeah.
I'll start.
Go.
Do you have anything?
I want to hear what you have.
Okay. So I think the first one for me, this is personal for me because the way my mind works is I'm typically moving 2 to 3 steps ahead of where I am now. So I'm past the present and I'm moving forward mentally to what's the next thing. That is a problem sometimes. It's great when you're in a visionary role because I can live 6 months, a year, 2 years ahead and start planning for those. It's not great when you're in the nitty gritty and having to do the things of today.
Yep.
And when you came on at the gym in a more solidified role, when we started growing, I made a lot of assumptions that you knew more about the business than you did simply by osmosis, literally just living together. And I made this assumption, a horrible assumption, that you could read my mind and you knew more, just as much as I did about the business, simply because you were my wife.
Yep.
Right. Which is obviously inherently wrong and not correct, which led to a lot of frustration, I think, for both of us. For me, the illogical frustration of why don't you know this? Right. And for you, the obvious frustration of like, why would I know this? Right. Which then led to like, yo, you got to like slow down and give me the opportunity to understand fully what's happening.
Yeah.
And you also have to train me to understand what the next step is.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I'm like the opposite of you, where I don't really think about the future. We talk about it of, even just getting married. Mm-hmm. I was more than 33%.
33%. She was 33% sure that she wanted to marry me at the time.
33% sure. But it wasn't 100% sure, mainly because I didn't ever picture what our life would look like outside of this moment. So I'm a very in the moment person. I live very like day to day, enjoy the moment, which is good. We balance each other out in that way of like, you're more visionary, I'm more in the moment.
And I love that about you because I have a hard time being in the present and enjoying the present because I'm always like, okay, what's the next adventure? What's the next journey? What's the next problem I can solve? Yeah.
I'm just like, let's make the most out of this day today, which definitely can have its own problems within the business. But I think, something that we assume being married that we forget about if we weren't married and we go into business together, into a partnership, not being a couple, you're just going into a partnership, you would clearly define roles and you would set the vision first and then the mission, and then you'd have your core values and you'd align on all of these things with a business partner. But when you're married, I think people forget that step and you say like, because you assumed, I was your wife and just because I was close to the gym, I would have already known these things. But at the time, before I was in the business, I showed up as a support system for you. Like I was the cheerleader still in that aspect. So I wasn't thinking about, okay, well, what can I fix for the gym? How can I grow the gym? Like my mind wasn't in that mindset. My mindset was, I'm going to support you, not the business. So what do you need me to support? And you need me to take care of the kids, make sure the house was good. Like a different role at the time to support you to growing the business. So then shifting to coming into the business, I had never thought about it in the sense of making money, retaining members. This was a completely different shift of, okay, now I need to support the business and still support you as a wife, which obviously had to change how I supported you in that aspect too, because I couldn't continue to keep doing all of the things at home that I was doing and also continue to do all the things for the business. And so, that was something we had to work through and navigate through as we continue to grow and scale the business.
Yeah. I would say early on, that was probably the thing. Me making that assumption caused a lot of frustration for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I remember being like, why doesn't she get this? And then I remember I remember one day you were just like, why would I know this? And I was like, son of a biscuit. It's like, you're so right. Like, why would you? Like, I was keeping everything in my head and I was like, this is how I wanted it done, but I wasn't communicating it. And I also wasn't writing it down.
Yeah.
And I was making the assumption that I could tell you what needed to happen and you would figure out all of the steps to make it happen, which you can now because you also have a ton of skill sets that I don't have. And you know this business that we're in as much, if not better than me in a lot of different ways. But at the time, yeah, I remember it was pretty frustrating. I remember the thing that frustrated me was how frustrated you were at me. Because
I was frustrated a lot.
Yeah. And I was just like, man, how do I get around this? And I just remember when we got to a point where we were able to communicate more clearly and we started setting time aside on the weekends to get aligned and understand where we were going, that helped a ton. Yeah. Doesn't mean that it doesn't ever happen. I mean, we just had one a couple months ago where we had to have a little heart to heart and really work through some of the inadequacies that I was showing as a leader and not doing my job as a leader for the companies that we run. And I was abdicating my responsibility to make decisions because I was making the assumption that I was like, cool, this needs to be done. But I was using wishy-washy terms and words and not being very concrete in what I was trying to say and really pushing forward the agenda that needed to happen.
I think looking back at it, we were both terrible leaders. Like we were just learning and growing. There's so much we would probably both do differently. So differently than what we would do now. Like my communication style was so bad. We were just we were green and very poor leaders. And looking back at that, it's like we were bad at communicating with our team and we were bad at communicating with one another. And we were bad at giving direct and honest feedback. We just assumed people would know because we know, again, it was like, if we know this, why doesn't the team know this? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just a good reminder, of going in business together with your spouse of like, you can't just assume anything. You have to treat it like a job. Mm-hmm. In a sense, there has to be clear expectations, clear division of roles. Because if you don't have that, definitely can cause a lot of frustrations. But if you do have that, the growth that you'll see personally and within the business, I think is exponential.
Yeah, without a doubt. I had another thing that I was going to bring up. I had it written down. Oh, yeah, this is a good one. The second thing that I thought about when I was thinking about this question, because it made me really think about it. And that was getting into business. So as a man, you have this ego, or I can say for me as a man, have this ego of like, I want my wife to see me as, I think this is for most people as like, I know I have my flaws, but like, I want her to look at me in a way that that respects me, that also is like, hey, you're awesome. Right.
Yeah.
And when you get into business with your spouse, there's a side of it, especially from my vantage point, I had been in the business. You weren't. Right. So I had this kind of business world over here where I was doing things and a lot of it was wrong. But you didn't really know that until you get into it.
Right.
Right. So you see all the personal side of good, bad, and the flaws on the personal side. You don't really see the business flaws. You just see the outcome. Right.
Yeah.
And then when you get into the business, now you see all of my flaws. And it becomes very apparent, right, that when I'm inadequate in certain areas across the board, now it's not just on the personal side, but it's also on the business side. And I personally didn't have a problem with that. It was more so the reflection of it as I went through.
Yeah.
And I don't know if maybe there were moments in time when there was like, man, yeah, I suck. And realizing, wow, I do suck. I need to get better.
We still think you suck. You say you suck all the time.
Yeah. I just need to get better. But I thought that was really interesting because I'm speaking to the husbands out there specifically, and the wives, if you have a business that you're starting, you're trying to bring your spouse into, understand that they are going to quickly find out all of your flaws, all of them. And so you can hide some of them on the business side. You can't hide them on the personal side.
Well, I think what's interesting, I think you kind of have them separated of like personal and business. And, you know, you probably, because it's personal and you're so hard on yourself, you probably see like, oh, okay, there's this huge hole on the business side. You're going to see all these flaws. But to me, I never noticed a large deficit because I think the flaws you have on the personal side are just a reflection into the business side. Like you're going to, the same, you know, the lack of communication, the assuming, all of those things on the personal side just reflected onto the business side too. So the holes it didn't make a gap any bigger of what you thought were flaws. It just, now it's not just home life, it's also within the business too.
Yes, because it just expounds, it just compounds the problems.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Dr. Kashi had a really, let me see if I can pull up his tweet. He just tweeted something, which I thought was really good. And he talked about how, let's see, so long as people run businesses, personal problems tend to mean business problems. And I thought that was such a simple way of putting it. And we talk to our team a lot is especially when we own the gym, is that your personal insecurities will be magnified when you're either coaching a class or you're in a position of leadership.
Yep.
And so it just becomes magnified. But I think it's really interesting for me because there are things that I could say, I could pass off on the business side of like, oh no, I'm doing this. And maybe it wasn't happening as fast as it should be or as well as it could have been. And the quality wasn't as high as it would have been if you were in the business or if I was doing the right job. But I could pass it off of like, oh yeah, I'm moving it forward before you got in the business. But then once you got in the business, you're like, this isn't moving as fast as it should be. This isn't the type of quality that we need to have. Yeah. And it's one of those eye-opening learning moments of like, hey, like we're in this together and there is no hiding anything.
Yep.
Especially when you're in business.
Yep.
Which is good.
I think that's probably the biggest thing. It's like the deficits or we'll say the, you know, the flaws from the personal side and the business side. They're basically the same flaws. It's more of you could hide when you're not in the business. If you're not in business together, you can hide those things on the business side versus the personal side. It's really hard to hide those types of things. So it just opens you up a little bit more to vulnerability to be able to see both sides. Like, okay, there's flaws in the home life and in the business life, which I think is just normal. It's life. Yep. There's going to be flaws everywhere. You can always learn and get better. Even when you get really good at something, then you see the next hole and the next area of improvement. So there's always constant growth in every aspect. I think that's probably one of the best things that have come out of us working together is it strengthened our communication with each other. And now because we're so comfortable with one another and we trust each other more, not that we didn't trust each other before, but we just have created this like in the trenches bond together that it's really easy for us to say, hey, I think you probably should have did this differently. Or you should have spoke to the team a different way, or you should have made this decision, 3 months ago, but you didn't. So let's make the decision now. It's much easier for us to call each other out and give each other feedback than it might have been, 5 years ago.
I think there's an important piece of that just because that trust that comes through that going in the trenches and struggling and seeing each other's flaws and that vulnerability, that is forged over time through when you are in a position where like you have always been so amazing at giving feedback to me because you've never put me in a position where you've embarrassed me in front of other people ever. And like all your feedback, even if you don't like it, like you'll question it like on a meeting, but you won't do it in a way that's like, hey, like, why would you think that's really stupid? It's always just like, well, there might be a better way. And then you'll be like, hey, let's table this. Let's chat about this a little bit more. And I'll realize, okay, we should probably talk about this.
Clearly we disagree. Yes. What's going on?
And we need to be aligned. But what that does for me is that I will listen way more, which is illogical because if it's wrong, regardless of how someone says it. But at the same time, we're all human. And the way you go about it has built more trust for me and you. Yeah. Because you won't say anything or disrespect me. I'll use the term disrespect ever in public. I'll never sugarcoat it privately. Yeah. Right. And you'll call me out, which is why I respect you even more and why I'll listen even more because you won't sugarcoat it and you'll call me out when things are wrong or when you need to change something or when you think we're going in the wrong direction or whatever it might be. But there's also the trust goes both ways too, because I know that you trust me implicitly and that you know that we're going to make the best decision together for whether it's a business or the personal life.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also really important to make sure we always talk about we need to be aligned at the top because, we never want to see, and there's a difference between like disagreement of like, let's work through this situation and that's okay to do in front of other people. But, if it's like, we clearly don't agree on what's going on and there's not a resolution yet, we're not going to like work that out in front of a team, right? We're going to go back because we never want the team to see us misaligned or think that we don't trust one another because then the team's going to start to not trust us, or each other either, right? Because everything stems down from the top. And so it's so super important always for us to be aligned at the top and, make sure that if we do disagree on something, it's in a respectful way. And then we, get aligned on it and then come back to it.
Always. And then there was the last thing that I thought of, and maybe you have more, but I had it written down as when I was thinking through this question, and it was working. The thing that I don't think anybody warns you about is that it will completely change your relationship. And I think it will go two ways. I think it will, for some, it will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and it will cause people to basically figure out that this is not good, right? And it can lead to a lot of problems because they allow their own insecurities to build up. They allow distrust to continue to build. They don't communicate, and the problems compound over time. And one person wants one thing, the other person wants the other. They are not in it together. They're not remembering their vows, and they split. But I think for most relationships, most marriages, and I don't know statistically if this is true or not, but I think for most marriages, when they go into business together, it creates the opportunity for them to have an even better marriage because you talked about it earlier, is that one shared vision that you have together, and you have this one thing that you're trying to accomplish, and you're trying to be successful, you're trying to grow. And if I was going to look at like the one key factor for a lot of successful marriages, period, whether they work together or not, is they both are looking to grow together in some form or fashion, right? It's not one person who's looking to skyrocket and selfishly take care of their own career and then leave, like my wife has to be at home and take care of the kids and all this stuff. There are dynamics like that, but I don't know if those are the best dynamics possible, right? It's great when you both are trying to grow together in some form or fashion. And being in business together, being biased here because we are in business and have been together for a long time, I think it's the best way to build a better marriage.
I agree. Wasn't there a study or statistic that you had saw recently that it was like,
I couldn't back it up. So I tried to look for it and I couldn't find the actual statistics. So we could talk about it, but like it was on a different clip. Yes. And I think it was like the divorce rate for married couples in business together that are working together in the same business is like, I don't know, 9% or 6% or something like that compared to I think it's like 45 to 50% of normal divorce rates.
Yep.
But I couldn't find the actual study that they said. So someone
will have to fact check it.
Yeah, someone will have to fact check it.
It makes sense though. It would support our theory of being on, having a shared vision and mission together with your spouse and how that just strengthens your marriage.
Yep. Is there anything that you would see from your side outside of what I brought up?
I don't know. I think you hit it all. Really, I would have never imagined that I could have a relationship this strong and this close. So it's not something that I would think like, oh, so no one warned me that this would be an amazing relationship. Because it's not something that I had ever pictured. Like I didn't know that you could have a relationship like this where there's a ton of trust and honesty and vulnerability and excitement and laughter and a lot of tears from struggle and success and failures, and just doing all of that together with one person just creates such an incredible bond that I don't even think, I wouldn't have ever thought was possible to have. And I would have never known that unless we went into business together.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think our relationship definitely changed completely when we went into business together.
Yeah. Because it forces you to do the hard things. It forces us to work through the hard conversations. It forced us to be open with each other. It forced us to talk about, past that might have, I don't want to say shape because I think you can change any type of belief that you have. I think you don't have to keep the same beliefs. But, acting a certain way because of something that might have happened, or you grew up a certain way or in a certain household, or, went to a certain church or whatever it might be. you have to like come in together and talk through those things of, okay, well, I might be making a decision this way because my dad would make decisions this way, or because, you know, the church I went to said I had to make a decision this way. And I think just going together in business together, it showed us that you could just forget all of it and we could create our own path forward and we could create our own beliefs that we wanted. So I think it just, which unified us even more as one, which is what a marriage is supposed to be, right? It's coming together as one. And I think that really helped solidify us coming together as that one head together in our marriage.
Yep. And I think it helped create a better partnership outside of work as well. So we both, because a lot of times I remember when I was in the business, I was so tired and exhausted that I feel like I didn't really help that much at the house. But I think together we have to pull our own weight. You still pull so much of the weight, like you pretty much manage most of it. But at the same time, like it makes it much easier. I see how hard you work in the business and I'm like, there's no way that I can let you work this hard in the business and also manage everything at the house. Like that is completely unfair and unreasonable. And we're in this partnership together. That means both in business and on the personal side. And so I need to be able to step up and help any way I possibly can.
Yeah.
So cool. This is a good topic.
It's a good one.
Any nugs to leave them with?
No, I'm sure you have some.
I don't. It's
parting
just,
wisdom.
no, not at all. I think it just, at the end of the day, I think getting into business is the greatest adventure any marriage can go through.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool. And I think it's an awesome opportunity if you ever have that opportunity to get into business together. And it's a good business to get into. It's not just doing it just to do it. And you have the opportunity to really change lives in some form or fashion, whether it's through a product or a service. I think it's by far the most, you can see a lot of fruit from it. And it's by far the most rewarding journey that any married couple can go on.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. I love you.
Love you too.